Good afternoon and welcome to our 10 years, 10 minutes interview. We are very happy to have today Bogdan Gogulan, the CEO of NewSpace Capital. Just before we start, we just wanted to remind you that you can certainly ask questions via the chat function or the Q&A. So, welcome Bogdan.
Thank you, Stefan. It's very good to be with you tonight, and thank you for inviting us.
A real pleasure, since you're also one of our newest members in the association. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Certainly. So I'm CEO and managing partner of NewSpace Capital. We are a private equity firm focused on investments in space and space-related industries. And as Stefan mentioned, we recently joined the Luxembourg Private Equity Association, and very happy to be a new member of the family. And appreciate that despite us being the new kid on the block, you find the time to join the webinar and find out more about what we do, about new space industry and investments in space.
For sure, and I think that the audience will be very interested to hear more about NewSpace Capital and this adventure. Could you now share with us what the main mission activity of your firm is?
Sure, and I will start with activities so that it gives some context to our mission. And I will start with the fact that there is probably a quite strong misconception about the investments in space, that they are really long-term and high risk. And this is probably because investors are thinking about the human missions to Mars and asteroid mining, which might happen in 50, 20 years time. And they forget that there is an existent 300 billion euros industry that exists right now. And that this industry is serving economic activities of over 5 trillion euros on our planet. The second misconception is that investments in space are about startups and early stage companies with high technical risk. And so here it's also important to understand that there are over thousands of companies in that industry that are really established with consistent revenues and cash flows that depend on the demand from the commercial clients in the traditional industries rather than scientific grants and government funding. And despite the fact of a very large community of growth stage businesses, there is lack of private equity funding in that industry. And if we look at the private equity in space, despite the recent surge of investment, and we've seen the compound annual growth rates of over 80% in the last 5 years in terms of the investment in this industry. This industry is still underinvested versus other industries in comparison in terms of the private equity. And this is really our mission, is to pioneer private equity investments in space. The underinvestment is happening primarily for 2 reasons: lack of understanding by the investor community and lack of investment teams with relevant experience. And I think that's where we are breaking the deadlock with the team with over 100 years of the industry, technical, commercial, and investment experience.
Thanks, Bogdan, for this clarification. This is really important to understand what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. What are then, in that context, the key distinguishing factors of your business model?
I'll go back to the fact that we are using a very traditional investment model for the market that might seem esoteric to some. And so we invest in the growth stage companies, and by doing that, we are avoiding taking on technical risk and market risk, and investing in the companies with resilient business models that are leaders in their relevant segments. Then at the same time, what's very important is that we are very carefully managing risk. As I mentioned, we don't believe that a space industry is inherently more risky than other industries. I mean, it might seem to someone that launching a satellite or sending a person to space is risky. However, it is not more risky than building a 70-story building or sending a cruise ship through high seas. There are just things that we know and the things that we don't know how to do. And that's why, to manage the risk, our team is focusing to invest in the things that we really understand. And finally, we invest in the companies with diversified revenue base that, in addition to serving the space industry, might be serving other industries such as aeronautical, oil, energy, government sector, and other sectors.
Thanks, Bogdan, also for those additional details, also to explain what you're currently looking for and how we can also understand your business better. But anyway, you are also linked to this promising space economy of the future. But why Luxembourg, and how does our country fit in such equation?
I would want to mention that when we're talking about space, people often are talking about the future, but it's very important to understand that space is also our past and present. From the very beginning of the space industry in the middle of the previous century, space industry was contributing significantly to the economy. I mean, still right now, any $1 of public funding being invested into space industry returns $7 to $20 of the multiplier effect. And for example, Apollo program by the US government brought even greater multiplier effect than the interstate funding program. However, yes, right now there is significant changes happening in the economy and in the space industry, as space is becoming the backbone of further digital transformation of our economy and our society. And with that, the role of the governments is becoming smaller and the role of the commercial industry is becoming much greater. And with that trend was very well captured by the Luxembourgian government, that early on understood that future development of space is going to be about development of commercial space, focusing on the applications that the space-based assets can provide to the economy. And that's where it really positioned itself at the far front of the development of that new space economy. And there is very good synergies taking place between the public and private sector in Luxembourg. And Luxembourg is really putting their money where the mouth is by supporting companies and supporting funds like NewSpace Capital and others to enable the industry.
Good to hear that. And for myself, being a fan of technology and discovery, I'm also really interested by the sector. But how advanced is the sector right now? And also, which trends have you recently witnessed? Now, just a global question. Are we really ready to start the base on the moon?
Good question. And look, space, we can't really lump it together and say that whether space is ripe for investments or not. If we are thinking about lower Earth orbit, it is just 100 kilometers away from us. You know, it's half a distance between Luxembourg and Brussels. If we are thinking about the moon, it's 80,000 kilometers away. If we're thinking about Mars, it's 77 million kilometers away. So of course, the further is the space frontier that we're talking about, and the more the technical challenges, and the less it is prepared for, ready for the private investments. And so if we're thinking about the moon, it's really the domain of the governments and science research. If we're thinking about the deeper space, it's still the matter of science and science fiction. However, the lower Earth orbit is really now the integral part of the global economy. Moreover, it enables the future growth of the global economy into the traditional industries such as agriculture, maritime, transportation, logistics, energy. And it really provides the necessary products and services to improve efficiencies and create new products and services that are developing this the technical and economic frontier. So as far as the lower Earth orbit is concerned, it is absolutely primed for the private investment. And in that respect, lower Earth orbit, in terms of maturity, is probably where internet was 20 years ago. So the technology is there, it exists, and now it is about applications and about finding the commercial applications for those technologies. And a good example I can give is the investment that we recently announced in the company called ICEYE, which is a Finnish company that is a leader in the Earth observation segment, and a specific subsegment of it called synthetic aperture radar. The radar technology's advantage is that it can make imaging of the Earth's surface even at night and through the clouds. So that technology existed from 1990s, but it was exuberantly expensive, and so it was only accessible for the governments. Now, the engineering approach that the Finnish company developed allowed to position the SAR sensor on the smallsat platform and launch that to the lower Earth orbit, and that unlocked completely new applications, significantly reduced the cost, and really created the market of its own, in which now ICEYE is the global leader.
Great. I mean, new entrants, you underlined also the importance of Luxembourg, and I imagine that you also have other international partners. With whom are you currently working, and where are the worldwide hotspots in the field? Is it usual suspects like in the US? Is it also newcomers like China in that field?
Also, excellent question, and thank you for asking that. And I think it would be interesting to understand for our participants, webinar participants, that while in the past it really was the race between the two superpowers, and then Europe joined to that a little bit later. Now it's really diverse in terms of the technical and commercial innovation. And so it's not just about the US, it's not just about Russia, Europe, China. And you can think of, I can give you an example of some countries that you probably wouldn't think that are really at the far front of the commercial development of space. Well, Luxembourg is one of them, but of course, Luxembourg was the pioneer of the commercial development of space. But there is also countries like United Arab Emirates, and recently Saudi Arabia announced its $2 billion investment plan to enable the commercial development of the space industry. Now, also what is important to understand that from the investment perspective, it is a little bit different. 2/3 of the investment so far went to the US, even though US is less than half of the market. And that left the companies in Europe significantly underinvested. At the same time, if you look at the large integrators and primes, such as Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or for ULA, it's going to be US companies. However, if you look at the supply chain of the industry, those who are making components, subsystems, and systems, there is going to be a disproportionately high number of those companies in Europe, which means that from the investment perspective, while US have been a hotspot, it's actually Europe, and specifically in the supply chain segment, that is very interested, exactly because it has been overlooked and has been underinvested.
That's also good news to hear that Europe is at the forefront, at least for that part, for sure. Based on your vision, what are the essential next steps that need to be fulfilled before humanity and NewSpace Capital start this new chapter?
The explosion of this space happened due to 3 reasons. One is the technical innovation. Another one is the regulatory change. And then the third one was the democratized access to space. If we were thinking 15, 20 years back, the only way to get to space was using Proton, also use rockets. Now, SpaceX and other launch companies really reduced the cost and made access to space much easier. So what we need right now, considering overall underinvestment of the space industry, and considering specifically underinvestment of companies in Europe, we really need to democratize the access of investors to this market. And as I told you from the beginning, this is what we set out as our mission, really enable the private equity investment in space, demystify this industry for the LPs, and ease access and ease search for the funding and for smart money from the company's perspective.
Thanks, Bogdan, for your insights. I think we should now move on to the Q&A. I think that we received via the chat function one of the first questions, which is, what are the most active parts of the value chain in the space industry, Bogdan?
In terms of so first of all, we believe that as far as the value chain is concerned in the space industry, there are specific parts that are significantly overinvested, as I mentioned, launch. So there are 2/3 of the investment went to the US, and then 2/3 of that went to launch industry. And there are some parts of the value chain that are significantly underinvested. What's important when we're looking at the value chain is to understand what are the parts of the value chain that are going to get the most economic benefit from the growth of the industry. Look, launch industry overall is operating with less than 1% profit margins. But if we look at the certain suppliers within the value chain of the launch segment, there are going to be companies that operating with 60-70% operating margins. And they can do that because of the less competition or because of the unique technology and specific advantage they have on the market. So it's not about say a specific segment, but it's more finding the right places in the supply and value chain where certain companies have unfair competitive advantage, have a unique technology that has high demand, and then at the same time, the technology that can be diversified and put to use in other industries. So that in this case, that company doesn't only depend on the fortunes of the space industry, but can really balance itself and balance the portfolio and have the exposure to the long-term growth of the space industry, but then also have applications elsewhere.
It's simply a very interesting field, very promising one. So with concrete business goals, you're looking into the right direction and with lots of opportunities also in the future. I think we have another question. Let me quickly check. Are also companies developing augmented and virtual reality solutions, considered as parties for funds and also stakeholders in the industry?
We've seen, look, of course, augmented reality and virtual reality are very interesting fields. And you know, when investor right now looks at the market, actually choosing what to invest in, I think have never been more difficult than before, because simply there are just so many interesting technologies and markets to look at. There is 3D printing, there are new materials, there is augmented reality, there is UAVs, IoT. But what's interesting about space that it acts as a focal point for all the new technologies. As far as the augmented and virtual reality is concerned, we haven't looked at the specific companies that would be developing that specific technology, but we've certainly seen companies and looked at the companies that use augmented and virtual reality as part of its operation. When they're looking at robotics, when they're looking at proximity operations, computer vision, and M2M communication. So those technologies are definitely ingrained into the value chain and play a big role in that.
And also, I think we also received the last very interesting question. What's the composition of your team at NewSpace Capital? What are the profiles?
Our team, as I mentioned, have over 100 years of experience in the industry, both in terms of the technical development, commercial experience, and also investment. And it has experience across the value chain, all the way from the component manufacturing, launching, operations in space, and all the way to the downstream applications of the market. Part of our team worked together for many years in the satellite industry, specifically in Luxembourg. And our team includes such distinguished veterans of this industry as Padraig McCarthy, as Daniel Biderman, as George Schmidt, and Martin Halliwell, who've been part to the SAS team. And also we have a team that has generations of fund management experience and brings the fund management experience to the team.
And I just also received a very quick and last one. To fund the first stages of space investing, are business angels and overall VCs ready for that? Can they add value, or is it only a market for really specialized players like you?
Stefan, I'm sorry, I had disturbance on the line, so I'm not sure, I didn't catch all of the questions. Could I please ask you to repeat that?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So in order to fund the first stages of that space investing, are classical business angels and overall VCs ready to do that? Or can they add also some value? Or is it really for dedicated to a market for specialized VCs and players like you?
Look, I must say that there has been interest across all the types of investors in the space industry, all the way from the angels to the sovereign funds. I mean, the industry really started, got its first fund then from the what we call super angels, so billionaires that were interested in that space, like Jeff Bezos. Now, also sovereign funds have been very big investor in that area because they see investment in space as an important economic multiplier, the way to diversify their portfolio and also enable new industries. Now, we've seen development institutions put a lot of the money into the space industry because of the aspect, the humanitarian aspect of space industry. And so it's not a surprise that space is a very big part of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and achieving that and tracking the performance of how we're getting there. And so, for example, International Finance Corporation, that has mandate of impact investment, was a big investor in space. Now, also in terms of the funds and accelerators that are doing early stage investment in space, there have been now a number of funds that have done that. And there is a number of accelerators and incubators that are focusing on the early stage businesses. However, as far as the growth stage investment is concerned, that's a tricky part of the business because that really requires the team that can help the company to prepare itself for the exit, prepare itself for the public markets, prepare itself to really run as a proper business with space assets. So this kind of skills is scarce, and that's where we can enable the teams to maximize their value and the returns to their investors. Saying that, of course, it's very important that the overall space financial ecosystem is being developed. And so we're working very closely with early stage funds and with the sovereign funds, and also with corporations that are investing in space to synergize and leverage our relatives' networks and experience to maximize the returns.
Great, very interesting, Bogdan. Thanks a lot for those inspired insights. Also, the audience for the different questions. I think lots of interesting elements to be further developed in the future. And we're also very happy to have you soon again, Bogdan, with your team. And I just wanted to highlight the next events that the LPEA is presenting. So we will have certainly our flagship conference on the 25th of November. Please feel free to register because we have fantastic guests and good speakers for sure. And certainly NewSpace Capital coming again with another angle. And also next week on the 17th of November, we will have the CEO also of Invest Europe, Mr. de Montgolfier, in order then to discuss the private equity sector and the latest trends. Thanks a lot again for joining, and see you soon.
Stefan, thank you very much for having me.